This legislation will come to order. Pursuant to the open meeting law, any person may make an audio or video recording of this public meeting and may transmit the meeting through any medium. Attendees are therefore advised that such recordings or transmissions are being made, whether perceived or unperceived, by those present and are deemed acknowledged and permissible. First, we have citizen input. Is anybody, call the roll. Go ahead, call the roll.
Councillor Kadim?
He'll be late. He's coming.
Councillor Kilby?
Here.
Councillor Liberty LeBeau?
Here.
Councillor Viveras?
Here.
Chairman Long?
Yeah. First order of business is citizen input. Is anybody here to speak on anything that before this committee? Do you got to sign up? If you could just state your name and address.
Sure. Marjorie Yitkin, is this
There you go.
Thank you. Marjorie Yitkin, 624 Mohawk Drive.
And you want to talk to,
I want to speak on behalf of the item number 5 that's before you. I'm also the Park Board Chairwoman, and I know before you would be, I know the word stipend makes everyone upset, but we do need, and we're looking for the approval for Nancy Smith stipend for the Park Board. She does attend the meetings as per her job requirement, but she does on and beyond. She does basically is what your city clerks do for you. She goes to the meetings, she takes the minutes, she types the minutes. I meet with her for the agendas. We prepare the agendas. She gets all our correspondence. It's quite a lot for us. And we have a meeting this week, which we have no minutes to go forward with because our secretary is Victor Farias, and unfortunately, he wasn't able to, work on that with everything going on, and I didn't have the time, quite honestly, to even jump in. So we're just looking for that small amount. If not, I would hate for us to take it out of our operating budget, but we need help. And I get that, I'm not big on stipends, but it is what it is. She's been doing it for over 2 decades now for nothing. I did call New Bedford, and I spoke to Brittany, and the director up in New Bedford gets $79.5, and she's been working with the department for 6 years. There also is another clerk, maybe even 1 or 2, which make about 35, and they do the minutes and so on and so forth. So all I'm asking is if, you would reconsider. I know it was tabled, but the Park Board of Commissioners, I'm here on behalf of them. Unfortunately, some of them couldn't make it. We really, really hope that you would support us in this.
appreciate your comments. Any questions?
Does the secretary in the park department still go to the meetings?
No.
She has, when did that stop? Or has she never?
I've been with the Park Board for 1.5 years now, and she hasn't been there since then.
Okay.
And, it's good to have someone with the wealth of information because this board's very active, and we're trying to do everything by Mass General Law and City Ordinance because it's important for everyone to be on the same page. And when we fall through, we can find out, Nancy has the information. Having her there is a beneficial.
So the issue that we had at the last meeting is when they came down and they asked for this about attending meetings.
Right.
It's something that these 2 people have been doing as part of their job for all of this time.
Correct.
So normally if they come down and they ask for something new, in this case, with that attached to it, it's new additional duties.
Correct.
And we have department heads that go to all the meetings. So I had asked Mrs. Sahadi for the extra duties that Mrs. Ferrera was doing in traffic with the parking garages so that we could see what it was that they were looking for, because if they've already been going to meetings for all that time, it's hard to then say, oh, okay.
It's not just going, let me reiterate, it's not just going to the meetings. It's going to the meetings, but it's doing the minutes. I don't know, I can't speak for what Laura does, but I can speak for what Nancy does for us. She attends the meetings, she takes the minutes at the meeting, she types the minutes, she sits with me or the chairperson to organize the agenda. It's not just attending the meeting. There's a lot to this that goes on.
But is any of that new, or has she been doing that always? That's what,
Well, she's been doing it, but by law, she doesn't have to do that. That's not part of her job requirements, nor is it part of Laura Ferrera's, too. I mean, it's not part of their job requirements.
I'm going to have to call this to...
All right, I'm just asking. All right.
This
Okay,
is an
I
agenda
yield.
item that's going to come up in time on the agenda.
Right.
This is
Well, I'm
public
just-
input. So we'll have this discussion when it comes up on the
Thank
agenda.
you. Thank you, I appreciate it.
No problem, thank you. So, peace.
Did I shut this off?
Get it. Minutes. We reviewed the minutes of the
Motion to adopt? Sorry?
May 7th meeting. We have a motion to adopt the minutes. Seconded, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Okay, we're going to take some of these, we have a request to take some of these out of order. Some people want to be here, but they have stated that they have other requirements. I don't know what those other requirements are, but it kind of irks me a little bit when we have to be here, and there are other things going on in the city that I'd like to be at, but the first order of business is the responsibility of this committee. So we'll have that discussion at another time. But we will take these out of order and try to accommodate some of the people that are coming late. I'd like to entertain a motion to take number 6 out of order. This is a proposed traffic ordinance.
So made.
second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? These are handicap parking.
Motion to adopt?
Motion to adopt, is there a second?
Second?
Motion to adopt has been made and seconded.
Motion for emergency preempt?
Second?
And a motion for emergency preamble made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Good. I don't want to get too far ahead of you. It was number 6, yeah. I'd entertain a motion to take number 7 out of order.
So made.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Number 7, take out all this miscellaneous traffic ordinances. Was referenced on 620. If we review them, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to adopt?
Second?
Motion to adopt has been, motion to adopt has been made and seconded to pass through first reading, I take it, right?
Yes.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's adopted. Motion to take number 4 out of order will be entertained.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. This is a proposed ordinance regarding kennels. From my understanding, this is just to pass so that our ordinance are in compliance with mass law. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Mr. Chairman, it is. It was brought to my attention, Mr. Hathaway, the building commissioner, and the zoning enforcement officer mentioned to me that the definition is not consistent with Mass General Law and our city code. So it's literally going from 3 kennels, which is in our zoning, to
3
4
dogs.
kennels. From 3 to 4.
3 dogs to 4
3 dogs, yes, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, the definition of kennels from 3 dogs to 4 dogs. This is typically a problem when you have something in zoning, something in state law, and then something in
We're
city
just trying to get
code.
them all to meld.
When one changes, you sometimes, typically the zoning gets forgotten when they do all the state law stuff.
You have something you want to say?
No, sir. Motion to adopt?
Motion to adopt is made. Is there a second? First reading. Oh, this is the one with the emergency preamble. Because of the timing of this, we're going to have to pass this, and then we have to do emergency preamble because time's running out, if that's possible. You got a question?
When this was originally before the council, we did have some questions with regard to, I believe, the last sentence. So the question was, if somebody has 4 dogs, 4 pets, right, that they would be required to have a kennel license, or is this just specifically for commercial?
Dogs.
Previously,
It's four
Dogs.
animals, yes,
Doesn't matter, commercial.
commercial or residential.
Okay, so if I had 4 dogs, I would be required to get a kennel permit?
Yes,
And then if you've got a multifamily, just say it's a 4-family, and there's 1 dog on each floor, is that required to have a kennel permit too, or is that considered separate?
that's a separate permit. If it's a 3-family, for an example, you got 3 different names,
Mhm.
3 different tenants.
Okay.
If they're all, if the
Single?
single family. All we're trying to do, Counselor, is mimic the state's
No,
requirement.
yeah, I recognize that, but I'm just, in reading this, I mean, kept by a person on a single premise, I mean, it's a single premise, right? I mean, I guess, could you make the argument that the person would be the landowner who's renting out the properties, that then he would be required to get a kennel permit?
Yes.
If he had 4 tenants?
Yes,
may I show this?
Yeah,
To Councilor Kadim's point. So this is directly in line with the state statute?
yes. I brought a copy if
Same
you'd like to,
language.
if you'd like to read it.
Is it-
I brought 3 copies.
I didn't see it. I'd like to see it, please.
So if you go to the, I think it's 4th page, Sean.
Yep.
This is the zoning.
I have it highlighted.
Okay. No, I just been
On the
informed
4th
too that
page.
this is, the
What the
ordinance
state
is in line with state. But
Yes.
this is for zoning.
Yes,
This is the zoning ordinances.
yes. That's what we're doing. It originally read 3 canines, 3 animals. The state changed it at some point to 4, and I was made aware of this through our dog officer, through an incident that we had, and I suggested that, I requested that they get a kennel license. And then it was brought to my attention that the state required, now required 4. So that's why we brought it to council's attention to bring it up, so that we're mimicking the state. In the pamphlet I provided you, I've highlighted kennels on the 3rd or 4th page in.
So under, whose jurisdiction does this fall under? Is it,
This falls under my
Building,
jurisdiction
Board of Health?
as far as zoning,
who does the inspections of the kennels? Board of Health?
Board of Health.
So what would the impact be if somebody, for all intents and purposes, it's not a kennel, it's just 4 pets? Board of Health would now have to go to somebody's house and start inspecting for
Right.
animals.
Correct.
Well, they would have had to do that if it was 3 dogs, currently, the way the law is written.
That's if they're reported.
Yeah.
Okay, in most
Yeah,
cases,
any-
the only time this gets brought up, or there's a problem, is when somebody has more than 3 pets, now 4. Okay, we had an incident, this was brought to our attention, for barking dogs on Meridian Street, a year ago, and that's how this come up.
It wasn't me. Might have been the president, but it wasn't me. No.
All right, I guess I'm just trying to figure out the implications on just an average homeowner who has, I don't think 3 or 4 pets. I mean, if you're an animal lover, if you've got 4 small dogs and a cat inside, I don't know that constitutes a kennel in my mind. It may constitute a kennel by definition, pure definition from Massachusetts general law. I don't know that this council or this committee would want to describe a kennel as 4 dogs, especially for personal use. Now,
So,
I understand the opposite spectrum of that. If you've got 4 large dogs and they're outside and they're not being kept properly or maintained, and you've got 4 dogs that are just constantly barking and becoming a nuisance, I recognize that, but
So, in our zoning requirements, okay, it reads 3 dogs. We have had many instances where there's more than 3 dogs, and we send it for a variance. And as long as nobody comes forth and complains, they get their kennel license, and all is good. The Board of Health goes out and inspects and makes sure that they meet the requirements. I make sure that they meet the zoning requirements, that's all I do.
And the other thing, Counselor, currently in Fall River, Chapter 6, under animals, under the definition, It's a collection of 4 or more dogs that are 3 months or older, and that's from, I have one copy of our current, or is it in, I have one copy of our, which is our current city code. So we're trying to combine, make our zoning bylaw consistent with our city code and consistent with state law. So we're actually increasing to the 4 from 3.
And at what point at what point does the kennel become, especially, I don't know, how many houses are on septic? It can't be many, but we've got some, right? So then you run into a situation where you've got to then start looking at the size of the septic, because it's technically supposed to be disposing of waste for the animals if they're kennels, right? So
Correct. We haven't had any instances of problems that I'm aware of. Since I've been a building inspector in the city, I've sent 2 people for a variance, because they had, first time was 3, they had 4, and this current property owner has 4 right now.
Okay, I yield.
Any other questions?
Motion to
Committee's
pass
busy.
for all readings. Motion to adopt pass for all readings.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor?
We
Aye.
need emergency preamble motion.
Yes.
Motion emergency preamble.
Is there anybody opposed to it? Sean? Motion was made for emergency preamble. Seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passed.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. I think we're going to take number 9 out of order this time. I take a motion to take number 9 out of order at this point.
Second.
Take 9 out of order has been made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. That's not the table. Yeah. All right, this is the discussion of establishment of an ordinance prohibiting the sale of any size or type of knife to anyone under the age of 18 years of age.
That is before you, Mr. Chairman, as a result of, I think, the original resolution by Vice President LeBeau that was followed up by correspondence with me and the 8th grade class, I think it's 8J, at Morton Middle School. As some sort of a class project, the 9 students in that class drafted a proposed ordinance, and there was a little bit of correspondence between me and them. And I told them in my letter of May 28th, which I think was prior to their appearance before you, that there were several laws regulating knives in Massachusetts, including a provision that knives are prohibited from all schools. However, there appears to be no restriction on sale of knives by age of purchaser. And I suggested to them that they change the language of your resolution to read no sale to anyone under 18. And I believe they did that. So the long and the short of it is, if the city wishes to restrict the purchase of knives of any length by people under 18, we have that power. It doesn't obviate the many state laws regarding carrying, possession of dangerous weapons, bringing them to school, and in fact, the school ordinance, it talks about college campuses and everything else. However, it's really up to you, but it doesn't really, I don't know if it adds any teeth to anything, but the young kids, students came down, they asked for it. There's no harm, no foul. I don't know that it adds any serious enforcement teeth to what already exists, but...
Just as a chair, as my comment would go in those lines, that, I really want to say great for the kids to come before us and do what they did, and
Well,
that's an
I
amazing
think-
thing, but actually, when this is in reality, I just don't see it as doing basically anything, because, I mean, you have, if we're going to get into this, is you've got kids in Boy Scouts, they get their totem chip, they can have an axe and a knife in it, people go hunting. It's not going to stop anybody from carrying, possessing. It just
No, it
stops
doesn't,
them
it
from
doesn't, and it
purchasing.
doesn't affect and I think maybe you've read it, there's a town administrator, there's a very elaborate statute that prohibits carrying almost anything, nunchucks, stars, fighting chains, gravity knives, switchblades. There's another kind of knife, I think they call it a butterfly knife.
Yep.
But, I mean, I was asked to give them some advice, and I did.
I appreciate it. Anybody got any questions?
I have a question.
Council LeBeau.
So, Judge, when I was talking to representative for the police department that was here earlier, he was saying there was nothing in here on age on anything. There's nothing, correct? Because they were
In where?
in the state law.
Yeah, I spoke to him before he left.
Yep.
And he's correct that possession, use, carrying knives and other dangerous weapons is well regulated by the state law. When I issued my letter to the students, there's a website, I guess there's a website for anything, Knife Owners of America or Associated or something, and they listed the various laws, and they mentioned that there was no restriction on sale of knives in Massachusetts. But, you know, it's kind of a tautology. You can't have, or you can't carry what you're not supposed to carry, so you shouldn't be able to buy it. And, I mean, we've come full circle, and yeah, it could cause some difficulties. As a matter of fact, I don't know why it doesn't, but the state statute with respect to the length of the blade could cause difficulties, I think, every fisherman in the Commonwealth. But it doesn't, because it's generally, if somebody misuses or carries, the way I read the statute, you could carry a penknife to school. You can't carry a knife to school, period. But anyway, that's what I was asked to do. That's what I did. That's what they did.
Well, I would like to be able to go back and speak to the class, since they had asked me to help them with this project, so I would make a motion to table.
Second.
Yeah, I think when you do speak to them, I'm not telling you what to say, but I think they should be congratulated for their initiative and drafting it, coming, as we know. I mean, it's kind of easy for us to sit at this table and kibitz and talk, but it wasn't that easy for them, so.
Is there a motion to table? Made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And I would say the same thing, reiterate to them, congratulations on the teacher as well. Yeah, and the teacher as well. It was awesome. Okay, so now we'll go back to our regular scheduled program. Item number 3, proposed ordinance marijuana facilities limiting the number of marijuana licenses to 8, referred 6/4/19. Who wants to kick this little ball off?
I think Attorney Flanagan would like to be heard as well, but that's up to you.
I have to leave. Let me get him down.
Call the mayor, ex-mayor. Want to call Flanagan?
You want to speak?
Ask him if he wants us to.
I have a question.
Go ahead, shoot.
This was tabled last time, wasn't it? Correct?
Yes.
Motion to lift.
Motion to lift.
Second.
Motion to lift has been made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, so it's lifted.
This was referred on June 4th, it was not tabled.
Sure was. I know it was, came in.
This was the new ordinance that was proposed, you had something prior,
Oh.
the resolution that was tabled.
That's correct.
This is a new ordinance. that
Is that a new one?
Yeah, so this was just.
All right, so we don't need to lift it. We don't
Take
need
that
to
back.
lift it.
I have a question.
Council LeBeau.
To the judge, the same question I had the last time. How many letters has the city given out?
This was a-
We have issued, as of today, 11 letters of non-opposition. As I said on June 3rd, we've received written inquiry from, at that time, 7 other individuals. And I think now we're probably up to another 4 or 5, of which at least one is very detailed. Just so we are using the same language. When I say we have received written inquiry, that's what it was. Some of it was a letter. Some of it, at least the 2 I wrote about on June 3rd, were fairly elaborate, professionally done proposals, with charts and all sorts of bells and whistles. But the direct answer to your question is we have issued 11 letters, non-opposition to date.
To date. So if this was to pass, is it basically first come, first served to those 11 companies and the rest are out of luck?
Excuse me?
If this was to pass and we limited the number of licenses to 8, but the mayor has already issued 11 letters, then what happens to the other 3 people?
Well, that creates a problem on several levels. Depending where they are in the Cannabis Control Commission process, there is a provision under their regulations that once a city issues a statement of non-opposition, once they get to a certain stage, you can't withdraw it. However, at this point, only 3 licenses have been issued. Last time I was here, I handed out the statewide statistics. So I think what would happen is, let's assume that all 11 applicants who have received letters of non-opposition also received licenses. And I will tell you frankly that some of them have not been particularly diligent in pursuing them. But let's assume all did. Then I think either the ordinance, assuming the ordinance said 8, would have to have some sort of a provision whereby up to 11 would be permitted if they applied by a certain date and were approved by the Cannabis Control Commission. Because otherwise, I think we get into a real legal tussle with whoever the 3 would be who would be, the odd man out. And, well, I'll tell you, it's not, the way the Cannabis Control Commission does it, I'm not sure I understand their procedures. They don't do it necessarily by order of filing. They do it by, I don't know how. I mean, I would tell you if I knew.
That's above our pay scale here, so we'll let that go.
So, and I have another question. In the 7 others that have done written inquiry, you said a couple of them were pretty in-depth. Is there any movement from the administration or from the mayor that you know of, that any intent to hand out any more letters?
Well, let me put it this way. I don't believe that he's restricting his ability to issue letters to qualified companies. As we've discussed numerous times, the city has the ability to limit above 8, but does not have the ability to reduce. I think reduce may be a ship that's sailed. So the answer is they're still under active consideration.
I yield.
I'll recognize the author of this resolution, which is Council Pelletier. As a private citizen, just name and address, please.
Leo Oscar Pelletier, 323 Peckham Street, Fall River, Mass.
Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I'm somewhat disappointed. First of all, Mr. Mayor, just to answer your question, you've been baiting me for about 6 weeks, a little bit. And where did you get the number from? Where did you get the number from? And you know where I got the number from. It was 20% of the liquor stores, and if you multiply that, you come up with 8. And the mayor knew this, and he even promised one of the guys that's operating right now, because I sat with him today, he told this guy there won't be more than 5. Oh, well and good. You can say what you want. But again, once you're telling the truth, what's going on here? A lot of people come up, gee, we're going to have marijuana, you're going to do this. Oh, well and good. I said, we're going to try to keep it down to 8. That's what we're shooting for. So why would the mayor sign 11? And I brought this up last time. It could be a problem with litigation and everything else. So I just don't think it's fair. 11 letters that he signed. He knew what he was doing. You talk about the monies, and I understand that last month, Mary Sahadi said that they gave close to 90,000. And talking with these guys today, it's more like 600,000 altogether. That's all well and good. And I see the business, that's wrong?
From January through May, the cash receipts we've received so far, 131,606.
Well, he told me up to date was 600,000. Well, that's all right, that's a lot of money anyway.
Still a lot of
And
money.
last month was 90,000. He said there'd be more
June
money
will be
this year.
90,000.
But we're talking with the individual. He says, listen, if there's any more than 8, they're just fighting each other. They're fighting each other, and that's it. So that's where I got the number from. That's where I would like to see it. And a lot of people out there, they just don't make too much comment about it because they're a little older. They don't like the idea of marijuana. Oh, well and good. You don't want to do it, don't do it. You don't want to buy it, don't buy it. And in the South End, you got the one at the state line, the one's going to sleep a mattress there, and then you got the one on Globe Street, and you got Charlie's. There's 4 right there. That's in a congested area. And then you got the bomb on Plymouth Avenue. Then you got the medical one in the mill and one up the Flint. And I don't know if there's any more than that. Down the north end, the medical seems to be doing a little business. I went by there, about 25 cars or whatever the case may be. But what we're talking about tonight is recreational licenses. That's it. The guy in the Tiverton line's got 8 licenses. And he's got the marijuana, the medical, recreational, he's got cultivation, right. He's got 8 licenses anyway. Yeah, it's all linked together. So, I was concerned when you come in, Mr. Macy, and we knew the number was 8, and then that night that you talked as well, we got 10.
Point of clarification, so, excuse me, Councilor Pelletier, did you say this was just specific to recreational?
Yes,
It doesn't say that.
well,
You can only restrict for recreation.
Okay,
That's
but,
what
all right,
the state law is.
should probably say it anyway. I yield.
and that's what we're giving out. Mr. Macy, you had given me this paper last time. It says here, 7 licenses, and then you got that from Boston, right?
I did, I had somebody do this. That's where they got the 11 from Fitchburg,
Yeah.
4 from Pittsfield. And just so we're clear, I have never taken the position that the city can only issue 8 licenses. I've been very clear that the city could not reduce the number they could issue below 8, and if they wanted to restrict it above 8, they could.
All right, saying that we gave out the 8, and then they want to give a couple more out, wouldn't that open the door that we'd have to let everybody else come in as well?
I had that conversation with a lawyer from somebody, this was at least a year ago, who either didn't get or didn't think they were going to get the statement of non-opposition. And I told that lawyer, I don't remember if it was a woman or a man, specifically that they couldn't tell us what to do, that it was discretionary as long as we were within the law, that there was no limit, and if we decided not to give out a license, we didn't have to. And I believe, I don't know if I have it, there's a case from Boston where this was so long ago, it was when the Board of Health gave out the medical licenses, where they sent it back on a very arcane ruling that the health board, at the time was medical marijuana, hadn't followed their own regulations. But I don't know if that really answers your question, but I've given you the information that I've been able to have. I'm not an advocate one way or the other. I sent you what Worcester has. I sent you, I think, 2 articles from different papers. I follow it. I don't copy everything in the Boston Globe, and it seems like the industry and the regulators of the industry, separate and apart from the cities and towns, are now talking about cannabis cafes. I read that in the Boston Globe. There's a contest between the industry and the Cannabis Control Commission. Industry says they're not going fast enough. Cannabis Control Commission says they're going as fast as they can. Not a whole lot of that, I don't know. I don't know what Attorney Flanagan is going to say, has much to do with us, except for the fact that over and above the 11 letters of non-opposition, I think we can pretty much do what we want.
If I could just add, I'm in agreement with Your Honor. May I? I think it's clear. It's clear on.
Are you finished? Wait, he's not finished.
Can I just add something? Well, it's on point. I think it's clear on many, many issues that the ability of a local community to regulate health and safety is very powerful constitutionally, Massachusetts and the United States Constitution as well. So I concur with what the judge just stated. Thank you.
And if I could,
You got sworn? Are you done?
No.
Oh, then finish.
Okay. And it says here in municipality may pass a bylaw ordinance limiting the number of marijuana retail to 20% of what we talked about that. And that's what I want to see. If this committee wants to give out more marijuana dispensers here in the Fall River, oh, well and good. Do it. I'm telling you, it's not the right thing to do. I've been on this at the beginning, and I don't mind. You want 8, you got 8. That's it. That's enough. After that, it becomes a problem throughout the city of Fall River. It becomes a problem for the business people because they're going to lose business. You talk about the money, too. You may have 3 licenses, maybe that they didn't give them out. That's 50 grand. That's peanuts. That's nothing. But you're going to get the percentage coming back to the city. A lot of money coming back to the city. And you decide, when you go to church, what mass you're going to go, what church. You got 8 in the city of Fall River. You got 4 down this end, 1 down that end, 1 up to Flint. How many places do you want to go shopping for marijuana? It's just crazy. And that's the thing that I'm pushing. I think 8's enough. I think that's the way we should go. And, my colleagues can do what they want. You want more, then give them more. You know where I stand. I'm very passionate about it. I take a beating from my colleague here. You want more, you want more. All well and good. It's just, we don't want to come from all over the place. Right now, we're dealing with Rhode Island. They're coming to Fall River through Tiverton and Newport and past Seacon. They come in here. Oh, well and good. They're making money. They're making money. That's enough. So that's where I stand, and I'm hoping we can get out of the committee some kind of vote if it can be done. I know Kathy went over, visited the place as well. You got the 10-cent tour. I didn't get no tour. I stood in the back. You didn't take me around. Very, very nice place. A lot of things going on there. And when I went there, I talked to the young man, and then he called his boss. He come down, the supervisor. He said, "Can you wait another 10 minutes?" And the big guy come down, all well and good. We sat down, we had a powwow on a couch there, all well and good. And I come up to the conclusion, like I did 2 months ago, 8's enough. A lot of people agree with me silently. Yes, you're right, we don't need any more. 8's too much, 5 is good. Where the number come, you know where it come from. With that, that's what it is with me. This committee can do what they want. 8 is enough. I yield for now.
Counselor Bo.
I have a question for
Attorney Flanagan,
Attorney Flanagan,
former mayor.
former Mayor Flanagan. You provide help to companies that want to get their license, correct?
Correct.
Am I saying that correctly?
Consulting, yes.
Consulting, okay, that's the
Chris,
word.
could you just,
I'm
for
sorry.
the record, state
Name
your
and
name and
address.
address, please?
Attorney William Flanagan, 60 Rock Street, Fall River, Mass.
So if a company wanted to get a license here, and there was already 11 letters of non-opposition, would you tell them maybe this is too saturated and to look elsewhere, or do you think it would kind of level itself out?
I don't believe Fall River is too saturated at 11 letters of non-opposition. The reason why I say that, it's not guaranteed that you're going to have 11 dispensaries open here in Fall River. The mayor could issue 20 letters of non-opposition. It doesn't mean 20 dispensaries are going to open here in Fall River. In the industry, a lot of companies like to get as many letters of non-opposition they can. They'll go to Fall River, they'll go to New Bedford, they'll go to Wareham, they'll go to Worcester, Springfield. They'll get as many as they can for their portfolio. They'll then go back to their investors and say, these are the opportunities that we have. We can build a dispensary in Fall River. We got a letter of non-opposition in Swansea. We can go to Worcester. You're only entitled to 3 per applicant. So there's 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts, and every week it seems more and more cities and towns are becoming welcoming to cannabis. They see that the benefits outweigh the negatives with it. So these dispensaries, and you got to take this into fact too, 2 years ago, it was vertically integrated. So when you applied for a license, you got a grow license, a manufacturing license, as well as a dispensary license. Now, under the newer regulations, you can just apply for a dispensary license. A dispensary, on average, even at the lowest end or the smallest dispensary, you're probably looking at a $3 million investment. It's a lot of money. You also got to take into account that banks are not financing these businesses. If I want to open a restaurant, I can probably get bank financing. I want to open up a laundromat, I can probably get bank financing. These are privately financed. So usually people with deep pockets are financing these dispensaries, which means that they're usually very conservative in where they place their money for investment. What's their ROI? What's the return on investment? Am I going to put $3 million in Fall River for a dispensary, or am I going to go buy a car dealership in Akron, Ohio? That's the decisions that people are making right now with their capital. So Fall River is not even anywhere near its saturation point. And the regulations as they sit now in Fall River, as long as you're 500 feet away from a Department of Elementary and Secondary Education's licensed education facility, you're allowed to open. I think what possibly the mayor's office is attempting to do is William Canning Boulevard, a lot of activities going on there. I wouldn't expect to see any more licenses coming out in that area. In fact, if a company were to contact me, I would probably not show them that area of the city. Downtown, really no activity going on downtown. North End, less activity. Flint, starting to pick up a little bit of activity. I think what's going to happen is the investors who are putting up the millions of dollars in this industry are going to make the final decision on whether or not Fall River is saturated. You may set it at 8, you may set it at 5, you may set it at 15. Well, because I understand that. Wherever you set it at, I think it's not going to be the local governing body that determines it, but the people who are financing these projects. If that answers your question.
So do you think if all 11 were to open, were to come and open, we had no limit, do you think it would then be saturated?
I still don't, because in my opinion, the more dispensaries you open, the more opportunity people have here in the city. Every dispensary that opens, you're getting $50,000 annually on a license. So even if they sell zero cannabis, you're still getting $50,000 contractually. So I would argue it's in your best interest as a city to open up as many as possible, because you're getting $50,000 annually on each license. Now, you have so many consumers on cannabis, okay, in Fall River. So I would agree that your annual sales are going to be your annual sales, whether you have 1, 5, or 8. Those are your annual sales. There are some factors that will deviate annual sales, how good your product is. So if you're exclusively licensed with, let's say, Incredibar, and you're the only place that carries that, then somebody from Seekonk, somebody from Boston, somebody from Worcester may come to Fall River, because that's the only place they can get that strain, that's the only place they can buy that candy bar, that's the only place they can buy that type of product. So by limiting yourself, you're doing just that. You're limiting yourself. From a capitalistic standpoint, from a business standpoint, you're making that determination. This is the market. This is what I'm able to bring. Am I going to make an investment? And this is a high barrier of entry to get in. Not many people have $3 or $5 million cash on hand to open up a dispensary. Also, you got to pass a background check. You got to pass a asset check. And even if you get approved locally, let's say you find a location, you get the letter of non-opposition, you have your financing, you may have something that the Cannabis Control Commission at the state level may not like. Maybe somebody on your team has a prior conviction. Maybe you've misfilled out the application. So the CCC does deny applications, even with applicants who have local support.
If you look at the chart going across at what step they're at, some of them never go to fruition.
And that's for a number of reasons. One, they didn't have the financing. 2, their team fell apart for whatever creative differences. Or 3, they can't find local support. So I don't know what the city's barrier is. I'm sure it's a high one. You know, they're just not issuing these out, whoever shows up in the mayor's office. But just because you get the letter of non-opposition doesn't mean you're going to make it to a ribbon cutting.
Right. I yield.
City Administrator.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Mayor Flanagan. Just a couple of things. I just want to correct the record on a couple of matters. First of all, Councilor Kilby, Mrs. Sahadi and I did visit all of the facilities, but there was no sampling done, just visiting. I did. I didn't want that getting out there. But in reality, when we looked at the facilities, there were some that there was virtually no sign of activity. And yet there were others that appeared fully equipped and ready to open. So the spectrum, I think that's what Attorney Flanagan was referencing, it was very broad. I mean, there were some that are in a process, but we saw very little sign of, concerted effort to move to that final stage. But I also want to go back to the mayor's letters of non-opposition. It was fairly recently that the council had before it a consideration to limit the number of licenses that would ultimately be granted, and the letters of non-opposition were issued prior to that time. I just want it clear that if the council moves ahead and decides to establish an ordinance limiting the number of facilities, then I'm sure that the mayor will take another look at the policy regarding the letters of non-opposition so as not to create any violation of local ordinance, or, as was referenced earlier, the minute someone gets that, they may start investing money in a facility, and we certainly wouldn't want to give anyone a false hope that they might be able to establish something that was in violation of a local ordinance. So I think it's really the council's decision as to whether they want to set that limit, and the administration will certainly respond accordingly. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Counsel Kilby.
I mean, hypothetical, we could make a vote to limit to 8, and, in the future, we could reverse that. I mean, an ordinance isn't written in stone, it could be changed. The mayor doesn't have a power to veto the council, so I'm inclined to support limiting it at this time to 8. I really am. I hear Mayor Flanagan's points in terms of if we don't limit it, then some company's going to lose out on opportunities, and I think if that's what you stated, correct me if I'm wrong.
May I?
Sure.
Yeah, I don't think my focus is really not on the companies and what their profit is or what their profit margins are. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because by limiting the amount of letters of non-opposition, you're hurting the city. And not only are you hurting the city, you're hurting the consumer. Go by the recreational dispensary anytime, Monday through Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. There's a line out the door. People are waiting in line to purchase product, and you're seeing the line form for people waiting to get in. That doesn't even account for the people who got there and then drove around and left because they didn't want to wait in line. Because there's such a line, you're also, when you have a high demand, your supply is going to start to go down. And also the price point's going to start to go up. By limiting the amount of dispensaries you have in the city, you're also creating a monopoly on price point. So the only people who are going to be benefiting are the dispensaries. They're going to set the price point at what they want, and the people, unfortunately, are going to purchase it, or they're going to do something even worse. They're going to go to the black market. The less dispensaries you have in the city of Fall River, the more black market sales you're going to have. And I don't think that's what the city of Fall River wants either. You don't want people purchasing.
That's necessarily true, but I hear your argument.
I'll provide you with the statistics and the studies to demonstrate it, Mr. Kilby, Attorney Kilby. So you're by limiting the amount of dispensaries to 8, the only group you're benefiting are the dispensaries. And I'll argue that until the cows come home. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why a committee would want to do that. There's some cities, bigger cities like Worcester, who limit them based upon the amount of alcohol license. But Worcester's the second largest city in New England. Boston's 1, Worcester's 2, Providence is 3. The amount they're limiting it to is not 8. It's much higher than that. 8 for the city of Fall River with a population of 88,000 people is a very low number. But also keep this in mind. When you look at Bristol County right now, Fall River is really the only place outside of the black market where you can make a recreational purchase. You can't do it in Swansea, you can't do it in Somerset, you can't do it in Taunton, you can't do it in New Bedford, and you can't do it in Attleboro. So people from all of Bristol County are coming to Fall River to make a recreational purchase. That is unfair to the person who has cancer, to the person who has AIDS, to the person who has multiple sclerosis, who is going to a dispensary. Granted, hopefully they're not waiting, medicinal applicants wait in line, but the product, what they're able to purchase, is limited. So by limiting the amount of applicants to 8, in my professional opinion, in my personal opinion, the only people who will be benefiting from this are the current dispensary owners.
And I respect your opinion. It's obviously a well-schooled in this area more than I am, Attorney Flanagan. From my point of view, I think it's important that elected officials such as the city council and the mayor's office still have the authority to represent the citizens of the city, represent, or have some say in how many licenses are going to be issued, and we could always revisit that later on down the road. I'm almost, as giving this thought and hearing this discussion, if the mayor issued 11 letters of non-opposition, maybe that should be the limit right now, because he issued those 11. And if we limit it to 8, we might see some litigation with regard to the other 3. 3 that didn't get it. So I yield. Go ahead.
Let me just interject something here, because I think we're getting off track, okay? One is we're talking about a license, which is the final piece, and now we're talking about letters of opposition. We're talking about licenses, not letters of opposition. Okay, so we're just talking about how many licenses. I'm inclined as a citizen and as how I see this is, this industry is changing on a daily basis, as former Mayor Flanagan has said, and I'm not sure limiting a license is going to be enough in the end. I'm not sure what we're talking about, whether it's going to be recreational, is it the edibles, is it the vapors, is it the actual weed, is it the cannabis itself? I think this whole business is going to change over the next 3, 5, 10 years. I think we're at the precipice, we're right at the beginning of this thing, and we're benefiting quite well because of being out front of this. We're getting a lot of people are coming here to buy it, and we can see it. But as this progresses down the road and other communities start to come online, I think you're going to see that erode a little bit. And again, it's going to go back to the businesses who have the money and going to say, is it more advantageous for me to operate in a city that's already given out 8 licenses, or to go to a town or another city that only has 1? It's let the laissez-faire attitude, is it? Let the business decide. So that's basically where I am. But when we're talking about, my concern is more about, and I think most of our concern from my colleagues is not basically licenses, but these letters of opposition of who they're going to, when they're going out. How come so-and-so gets it, this one doesn't get it? And we've already had that conversation with Attorney Macy, and he says that we have some regulations in place that says, they got to be legitimate people. They got to put a business plan. You just can't go up there and say, hey, can I get a letter of opposition? Here you go, I want one. So, yeah, I think it's working out pretty much, but I do understand Councilor Pelletier's concern, and I have that concern also. So, this is a difficult one, but we'll see what the committee has to say. Do you have something?
I just wanted to make clear what I think you already made clear. Essentially, the city does not issue the license. The ultimate license is issued by the Cannabis Control Commission. The first step in the process is a letter of non-opposition. I've said this before, and I don't want to sound like a broken record. I have no stake in how the city attempts to regulate it, but I do have a problem if we go below the 11 letters of non-opposition that we've issued. Now, we may, for those who don't want, we may get lucky. And the Cannabis Control Commission may turn around and say, look, of the 11 people who submitted letters of non-opposition, we're only going to approve 7 or 5. They've only approved 3 so far. But that's really all I have to say. I just want to kind of keep the parameters clear.
Councilor Kadim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a couple of holes in Attorney Flanagan's argument with regards to a couple of things. So first of all, the price pointing, I completely agree with you, but unfortunately, or fortunately enough, other communities are going to be opening up. Somerset's going to be opening up. New Bedford's going to be opening up. Taunton's going to be opening up. So you're going to have more avenues and more of a competition in other communities. So you're not going to see these other communities constantly going to Fall River. It's going to be more of what's more convenient, right? And I think what we're going to see, and I agree with you, I think the sales are the sales. We're going to see what we're going to see regardless of how many we have. But the question I have is really to the administration on what they see from a strategic standpoint. How many licenses should we offer, right? And if we're talking about the medical, I think, number one, that we can only limit, per Massachusetts general law, the recreational licenses. We have no control over the medical aspect of it. The only thing that we can hold up on the medical aspect is what we're calling the letter of non-oppositions. Those letters are not required for the recreational. So off the bat, the legislature made a decision based on a review, and I don't know what their reasoning behind it was, but there must have been some type of reasoning behind it to say there should be at least a minimum or a floor of how many licenses are given. They've never identified what the max should be. And one would question, or I would at least question, why isn't there a ceiling, right? There should be a ceiling in there, just similar to how you've done a ceiling with liquor licenses, right? Populations, things of that nature. So even in the event, if we do limit the licenses that are going through recreational marijuana, there is still an avenue to get more shops open for the medical aspect of it, outside of the recreational. What we're looking at for is recreational. Now, as a city councilor, from a planning standpoint, I think we missed the boat in trying to create an overlay district for our medical marijuana. So my concern now becomes is where are these locations going to, where are these facilities going to be located, right? And I know there's some bylaws and some regulations that are in place outside of so many feet away from schools and that nature. But you could have it in the north end, in the middle of a residential area, or it could be all over the place, and we have not done the proper planning from a city standpoint to say, okay, this is what makes the most sense for marijuana. Now, the question becomes, do we want to be known as a city of marijuana? I don't know, and I think that's where my question goes to the administration. What has the administration, or what type of analysis has the administration done that would suggest what they feel comfortable with in terms of a license? Is it 20 licenses, is it 30 licenses, or is it just as many licenses that the open market's going to allow for?
I don't know that there's been the kind of analysis you've talked about. As everybody, I think, is aware, this whole, I want to call it an industry, I don't know what you want to call it, kind of grew without anybody looking at it. It started out with medical marijuana, and the medical marijuana people came in and felt, wherever they felt this as an industry, that they would be able to establish parameters, and you can correct me if this isn't the history, but the parameters as to use safeguards, maybe even get the banks to accept their deposits. And I think, at least some in the industry told me, that they were looking at a 3 to 5 year window where there would just be medical marijuana permitted.
It could blow up.
The next thing anybody knew, I mean, I didn't monitor this, and so somebody may have, recreational marijuana is there. And then I keep calling it the Board of Health, it was the Department of Public Health that regulated medical marijuana. The next thing you know, it's the Cannabis Control Commission that's regulating everything. Then you get the complaints, they're too slow, they're too fast. They do have an elaborate procedure, and I can't speak to how effective it is or it isn't, but I can tell you that Mrs. Viveris and Mrs. Sahadi did some projections, but I think I was here at budget time maybe 2 years ago, was it? And we were debating whether or not the 3 or 4 marijuana facilities were going to pay their 50 in that fiscal year, and they didn't or couldn't. Now that's caught up with us. So I think, I'll leave it to them, but I think any projections are simply that. I mean, you can multiply 20 by 50, you can multiply 10 by 50. We're
Right.
guaranteed that, and we're guaranteed 3% of whatever they sell.
Yeah, and I recognize that. The other thing is, you know, as more competition comes in, there's obviously the price point drops, right? But the other piece to it is as more states are starting to do this, we're going to start seeing bigger businesses that are going to come into this, and really, it's a short window on how much we can actually kind of gain from this industry, right? Before the market starts clearing out itself. Then the question becomes, from my standpoint, as we all know, it becomes very, very difficult to turn around and redevelop a lot of these commercial properties, right? So these properties that have been developed specifically for marijuana that are now no longer viable because of the market correction, we're now going to start seeing a lot of these commercial businesses that are going to be vacant, which is going to impact the taxes. So those are the types of things that I'm concerned with. So not knowing, I guess, if I'm hearing it correctly, that there's really been no analysis from the administration, I don't think that it necessarily hurts this committee or the city council to put a limit, whether it's 8, and I would agree with you that we go to the 11, since the 11 either host agreements or a combination of host agreements and letters of non-oppositions have been issued, that we do that and we allow the market to play out and let us analyze what it looks like and what the impact is for the city of Fall River, you know, what the quality of life issues are, and if the administration feels that, you know, 5 more licenses or 10 more licenses are needed, then come back to to the council, and we correct the ordinance, and we say, okay, we're all in agreement. There's really not that much of a impact and quality of life to our residents. We're comfortable with the issuing of, another 10 or 15 licenses, then we make that amendment. I mean, that's an easy enough thing to do, in my mind, in terms of an ordinance, so, Mr. Attorney Flanagan.
Thank you. Councilor Kadim.
Well, I have to recognize
I'm
you.
sorry.
He's done, Judge. Okay, now you're ready.
I think the analysis you're talking about is currently being done in the private sector. So the applicants are doing an analysis on whether or not it's profitable for them to locate in the city of Fall River. And at the moment, there seems still to be a high level of interest in Fall River as there was 2 years ago. So applicants are not shying away from looking at property in the city of Fall River. If you limit it at 11, you're probably not going to see 8 open. It might be less than that. I don't know if 11 is the number. Maybe it's a little higher. Maybe it is the number. But I think you're on to something where there should be an analysis on it. And I know Councilor Pelletier is basing 8 off of the amount of liquor license, and Councilor Long is correct. It's not 8 letters of non-opposition, it's 8 dispensaries that are open. No one knows, I don't think, what that equates to in letters of non-opposition, because somebody may get a letter of non-opposition and not open. Somebody may get a letter of non-opposition, get approved by the state, and then lose their funding and not open. So 11 letters of non-opposition does not necessarily guarantee 11 dispensaries, nor does it guarantee 8. So as a city, an analysis should be done. The city just hired a new economic development coordinator. That may be something she looks into. You have the Department of Public Health. Work with them. If you're concerned about the negative impact the amount of dispensaries can have on the community, I would argue that you have the statistical data to back it up on what it should be, because then it really is just becoming an arbitrary and capricious number, even though you're basing it upon the amount of liquor licenses.
I just have one quick question. Does this committee, city council, have the ability or the power to limit the number of letters of non-opposition? Because I think that's what we're talking about. Because without that letter, they can't go any further. So my question is I think the discussion that we're having, I think what, we can say licenses, okay, I get that. But that doesn't stop the letters of non-opposition from going out. They can issue 100 of them.
Point of order, can I,
Go ahead.
just clarification, so they'll, go ahead, you can go first. Okay. So the letter of non-oppositions relates to the medical marijuana aspect of it, okay? So the legislature does not allow you to limit the number of medical marijuana facilities that you have. What it requires in order to get, as a prerequisite to getting a license before you can even go to the state, you need to obtain what is called a letter of non-opposition from the community, right?
That's
So
on medical
That's
only.
on the medical. On the recreational side, what they're saying is that you can only, you have a floor of 20% of your liquor licenses that you have to give out.
And that's 8.
That's
for,
8, assuming that that's the right number, I'm going to say yes.
Okay.
At which point.
But we can't go any lower. We can go higher, but we
Right,
can't.
so, and the only thing that you need in order to obtain that license is a community host agreement. So as long as the community host agreements are issued, then an applicant can go before the state requesting a retail license. But again, Attorney Flanagan's right. I mean, there's a process to go through this. It's just not stopping here. Your build-out has to be approved,
Yep.
your security plan
Yep.
has to be approved.
Yep.
There's a lot of regulations and loopholes that you have to go through when you get to the state. What we're looking at, we're not putting any limit whatsoever with this resolution on medical marijuana, so the mayor can continue to give all these letters of non-opposition. What we're stipulating is that there can only be 11 or 8, or
Recreational
whatever
license.
host agreements that are going to be issued and signed by the city.
Councilor Kadim recited that a lot more else one than I could have, so that's what I was going to say, basically.
Pam, you said. Go ahead, Council Pelletier.
Do we know how many dispensaries are operating now as far as recreational? Is it just one?
Just the one.
I think there's one.
Well, that's the point of the whole thing as well. The only the one that's open. They have 7 more that's gonna open. So that's gonna determine what is going on. That's why I feel, as we go on, and, Boston should come a lot faster and sooner to give these licenses out. And if this council votes to cap it at 8, and we contact Boston, the CCC, and say, hey, true ordinance, we capped it at 8, then I don't think they're gonna issue any more licenses unless
They couldn't.
we again redirect them, say, listen, maybe we need a few more. But I think this is a start, it's protecting the people a little bit, and, if it comes out that we can cap it for 8, like you said, and some of my colleagues, you can always go back.
Councilor LeBeau.
Judge, could you just clarify? You had said 11 letters of non-opposition. Is that for medical, or do you mean host agreements
It's
for recreational?
Any combination, I don't know why it says 7. There are 3 retailers, 2 provisional, 1 final, 2 product manufacturers, 1 final, 1 provisional, 2 cultivators, 1 final, 1 provisional. So I think one of the problems is the deeper we get into this, the more complicated we find. We have issued 11 letters of non-opposition. 2, some are just cultivating, some is, I don't think there's anybody who's medical and not retail, but a combination of people. We, as a city, have not issued any letters of non-opposition without an accompanying host community agreement.
Okay.
So if I tell you there are 11 letters
It covers
of
everybody.
non-opposition, there are 11
Host
host community
agreements.
agreements. And they're all basically the same, 50%, not 50%, $50,000 plus 3%, and I explained, I think, long ago why we reduced it. And I think there's another 3 that comes from the state in the form of excise.
That's for recreational.
To answer your question, just so it doesn't get lost, I'm not sure that the council by ordinance can restrict the mayor's ability to issue letters of non-opposition. I am sure, however, that if there were such a resolution, the Cannabis Control Commission will be aware of it. And what they would do, I don't know. As I say, I don't really understand how they operate, but I'm sure that they would take that into consideration.
So then I have a question. If we're talking about the actual licenses, and we don't know how many are going to go through to fruition, they could stop along the way for any number of reasons. The administration could give out 20 host agreements, and maybe 5 or 6 or 7 of those might finally open. But we don't know, like Mayor Flanagan said, what that correlation of number is.
No, the only, well, I won't say the only. In our host community agreement, we have a provision that they can't assign the agreement. So that means if I have an agreement, I can't sell it. However, these well-financed people have, at least in one instance, bought a majority interest of the stock in the companies, and we can't prevent that. But when they do that, they're pretty substantial companies.
Are you able to give out a host agreement with the understanding that there is a cap on actual licenses?
I don't know how we could do that. See, one of the problems is, and I read it again today, I don't know if you've read it, Councilor Kadim, but there's a certain point after which a community cannot withdraw its non-opposition or its host community agreement. I think it's about halfway through the process, but I'm not sure. So essentially, Cannabis Control Commission takes the position, look, once the train leaves the station, the Fall River Station, 2023, according to the governor, once the train leaves the station, we decide how far it goes. so far, I think they've been very diligent to the point of people complaining about how slow they're going.
But at this point, you know, just interject something is, if we can give out all the letters and host agreements we want, if this body tonight, or the city council at some point in the near future, votes to limit the recreational licenses to 8, once we hit that 8, I don't care how many of those host agreements, they don't count.
I feel like the letter, the host agreement has to say that.
Right.
That's not necessarily fair.
Agreement that you issue is going to go through. You have to assume that.
Well, you can assume it, but if we limit it to licenses,
That's what
then
I'm saying, you're not going to issue more host agreements than what you've put in.
Right,
So
the
if-
ordinance.
if the ordinance says 11, then you would, if there's already 11
no,
issued.
but we
you
don't know
should-
what kind. They're coming in, they're getting a non-opposition letter.
No, that's-
That is directly for medical. So they're getting a non-opposition and a host agreement. We don't know what they're doing.
That's what I was told.
So I just want to know, how's this all,
No, if I could, just
it
quickly.
starts off and we just get it down into a more, we just keep honing it to a
No.
sharper point.
We have to take the medical piece and the recreational piece completely separate, because I agree with Attorney Flanagan and the judge on this. The city council, the legislative body, has no authority whatsoever to limit or put in any limitation or restriction on the number of not letters of non-oppositions that are given out, because
Right.
that's an executive aspect of that. But the recreational is a legislative body approval, so we can set that. So you can have 100 letters of non-opposition out there for medical marijuana.
Doesn't
right?
matter.
So if they get those licenses, they can
They get
only
'em.
sell medical marijuana. There's a distinction, and you've got to track it completely separate from, even when you open up a facility, recreational and medical. So you can have 100 of those, but with if we put in a limit, whether it's 8 or 11, you would have to assume that the city would not sign more than those amount, whatever that number is, more than those host agreements. You would have to assume once you sign that host agreement, you're gonna get it. You gotta wait for it to go through the complete process of the state, and that could be 2 years, 3 years before, and I don't know if it's that long, but a year and a half before you find out before somebody has been denied, right? And at that point, then you'd say, okay, we know somebody that we just entered into a host agreement with, doesn't have the ability to get the license, so we have another license available, so we can start looking at another company to get a host agreement.
I get it. I understand.
But again, you can have as many medical that are signed by the administration.
Do I still have the floor?
If you'd like.
Yeah, that's a point of clarification over. My only concern is by that point, other people have gone elsewhere. So these host agreements, Judge, that you have, are they all involve recreational?
No. Some involve medical and recreational, some involve recreational and cultivation, some involve, I don't know what you want to call it, manufacturing. They're going to produce a product,
Edibles
cookies
or
and
whatever.
things like that.
Cultivation is separate.
Right. My concern is if you limit it to that number and then you wait the year or 2 years and then realize that company's not going to do anything, another company might have already gone somewhere else. Is there no way to put a caveat in the host agreement that, we'll sign this host agreement, but, we have a ceiling limit? So if you don't get it done, you're out?
Well, I wouldn't want to put us in that position. I mean, you can't sign a contract with your fingers crossed. I mean, I think if we were not going to enter into the host community agreements, we just shouldn't.
But on the other end, they're signing it with their fingers crossed because they don't know that they're going to get all the way through.
That's true. But again, once we sign, it's not up to us anymore. So I think we said it before, but of the 11, if 2 get rejected, and frankly, the Cannabis Control Commission works so slowly, I haven't seen a denial, I've just seen they haven't done anything. They deny 2, well, now we've got.
How many of these are just recreation? I'm sorry, how many of these are just medical? Any of them just medical?
I don't think so anymore. I would have to go back and look at the agreements. I don't think, I think people realized pretty quickly that the medical was, not the way to go. commercially. I'm not speaking for the industry, I'm just speaking for what I saw coming into the office.
Well, I think at this point, from the committee standpoint, we've kind of gone over what we have to go over. Council will have their say on this. Again, we'll probably reiterate a lot of these issues in front of the council, but I would entertain a motion.
Judge Mason, how many recreational host agreements do we have right now?
One.
Let me put it this way. I would have to go back and parse them out, but I'm comfortable telling you that it's 11.
Okay,
Now,
so-
if it's less than 11, at least the sense I get is that's fine. It's not more than 11, I can tell you that.
Okay, well,
And I'm pretty sure it's
thank you.
less.
I'm-
Whether it's 7, 9,
I'm going to make a motion that we adopt an ordinance limiting the number of recreational licenses and host agreements to 11 at this time. Well, limit our recreational community host agreements to, with regard to recreational marijuana to 11. And the rationale for that is, I think we're all on the same page, and if my understanding Corporation Counsel, I think he thinks that's the proper way to go. I think Councilor Kadim thinks that's the proper way to go, so we can keep some control, and we can revisit this down the road if we'd like.
That's a motion to limit the host agreement and licenses to 11.
Recreational to 11.
Recreational to 11.
At this time.
That's the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that for discussion, I just kind of.
Okay, second has been made and seconded. Discussion, Councilor Viveras?
I love my just.
Thank you. Just real quickly, are there any current applicants, anybody coming down the pipeline for a non-host agreement?
well, non-host agreement, no, everybody wants it.
That's what I...
Everybody wants two things. Everybody wants a letter of non-opposition and a community host agreement, or a host community agreement. There are, on my desk, as of June 3rd, we had received written inquiry from 7 other individuals or entities, of which 2 are quite detailed. At this point, we probably received another 2 quite detailed. When I say what's detailed and what's an inquiry, a lot of people call, they might even call the city council office, I don't know, they just call on the phone. Can you tell me what the process is to, get a marijuana license? And we, at least, well, I think all the city departments either refer those people to the mayor's office or to my office. My secretaries always tell them, put something in writing that at least identifies who you are, what you want to do, and go from there. 90% of the calls never result in a letter. When I said 7 in June, there were 7 at least letters, there may be a couple more now, of which 2 people came in with a formal brochure, presentation, graphs, projected sales, projected income, projected employment. The cultivators obviously employ more people. I've got everything upstairs. Anytime anybody wants to spend.
If we make this vote, it's going to continue to come in. That's not going to stop it, so.
Look, all I want is to make sure that you have the information that you want, or you need, or that I gave you, even if you didn't want it.
Councilor LeBeau.
Excuse me.
Who's?
I still got the
You still have the floor. Go ahead, I thought you had the answer, please.
Thank you. I think this is a good conversation. I do think that we should look at a limit. I don't know what the number is. If it's 8, if it's 15, if it's 20, I don't know. I think we're just so early in the stage, and we may not have all the answers. We may think we're on the right track, and we might be. But I would almost rather see if we can, if there's a limit on the host agreements that we can do over the next year. And we continue to revisit this until we get a better handle on what that limit should be, instead of just coming out and saying, it's 8, that's it, here's the limit. I'd rather see, put a limit on the host agreement and revisit this sometime down the road, when we have a better idea of how many applicants we have, how many of these recreational dispensaries are opening, and we have more information to make a sound decision. So with that, I yield.
Councilor LeBeau?
Mr. Boss.
Attorney Flanagan, what is the percentage that you think goes through to fruition after they get a host agreement or a letter?
Very few. Let's say there's 185 applications pending right now at the CCC for recreational dispensaries. There's approximately 15 open throughout the Commonwealth, and this process has been going on now for 3 years. And out of the 11 host community agreements that have been issued from the mayor's office, you only have one recreational dispensary open. And to their credit, they opened up at a lightning speed pace. They probably defied all odds in opening up how quickly they did. So to their credit, they were able to line up their application, get it submitted without any errors, and get their doors open. So
my worry is
it's
that
very difficult to open.
if we say that we're only going to do 11 licenses, we want to put a cap on licenses, and I'm okay with a cap being on licenses. But if you do only 11 host agreements, because you have to think that all of those are going to go through, the chances of all of those going through are, what would you say the percentage is?
Very slim.
So then you ended up, by the time you realize that maybe half of those have stopped progressing and you open it up again, you've lost a window of opportunity to fill those licenses. So I'm okay with a cap on licenses, but I feel like you could give out, there has to be I feel like we're missing something in between here, between the cap on licenses and the host agreement, because it's not a definite.
And I think the concern of Council Pelletier is being very sincere in when he wants to protect the city of Fall River. And the reason why I think he wants to protect the city of Fall River is that he doesn't want this to have any negative impacts on the city. And Councilor Kadim brought up a very good point. Typically, the way you limit the amount of impacts you have on a community through business is through zoning. And right now, Fall River doesn't really have any zoning in the cannabis industry. The majority of cities and towns do. The first question I get asked by a potential applicant, and there's more than 11 right now, to answer Councilor Rivera's question, I know at least 3 or 4 potential applicants who've already spent at least $75,000 in soft costs.
There's more than 7.
More than 11. Look at
11 have been given their letters.
Right, but it's probably a lot more than that looking to come to Fall River.
I think that's right.
Right.
But there were 7 as of June 3rd that I knew about.
And who spent a lot of money in soft costs, engineering costs, legal fees, consulting fees, looking to open up here. So the first question they ask me is, what's the zoning in Fall River? And when I say there is none, they're flawed. They really have a hard time wrapping their hands around that. The only protection you have right now is 500 feet away from a school. Not a playground, not a park, not a daycare, not the Salvation Army, not the Boys and Girls Club, a school. The hours of operation, very open. The days are very open. The products to be sold are very open. Signage is very open. I know you have an impact review board, but it's really on a consultant basis only. There's really no bite in that board. I really think this conversation is a conversation that has to take place in zoning. That's just my opinion. I think if you put the proper zoning in place, you alleviate not just some of your concerns, all of your concerns. Because the question you have to ask yourself is, why are we trying to eliminate or limit the number of licenses in the city? Not to have a negative impact on the community. And you do that through zoning. That's just my opinion.
I yield, thank you.
If I just to correct one thing. We do have zoning. We don't have marijuana-specific zoning. So, for example, you can't open a retail establishment of any kind in R2 district. However, you can open a retail marijuana dispensary in a local business district, depending on the size of. So what we've got is the standard local zoning.
Council Kadim.
Thank you. Just to Council LeBeau's question about the HCA's, the host community agreements, that's really the first step. So you can't, I mean, it's the prerequisite to even submitting for an application. So if you give more community host agreements than the number of licenses allowed, if those individuals are approved, then I'm not sure how you determine which businesses are able to get the actual license. You're already entered into an agreement with them. So it's a signed document, a signed contract. So that's the only thing I would throw out there. My question is because I think I'd like to amend the motion as it reads, just to, and I want to get Corporation Council's opinion on this. I want to get in there that the maximum number of recreational marijuana licenses available at one time in the city of Fall River will be limited to 20% of off-premise liquor licenses or 11 licenses, whichever is greater.
Existing.
Yeah, just, and the reason I want to throw the 20% in there is for whatever reason, if the population changes and then our off-premise liquor licenses are higher, we get awarded more licenses, I don't want to have to constantly come back down. I want to be able to capture both so that it's automatic that we maintain that 20%.
We're still at the problem of a license versus a host community agreement. We still have the problem. Look, I don't think anybody
But you're not going
wants to delay this,
But you're not going to give a community host agreement to somebody that you're not
If there's a
planning on giving.
restricted ordinance.
Right.
that's right.
That you're not planning on giving a license to, right? So that's why I say that.
Okay, but did we get it's not really semantics. We're not giving out letters of non-opposition or host community agreements to people we don't think can viably operate in our community. However, the actual license is given by the community, the Cannabis Control Commission.
No, I recognize that, but we set, so the CCC is going to look at the number, or what the restriction is for the city of Fall River, and they're going to issue those licenses, right? So if we have 20 host agreements that are out there, and this passes, and we only have the ability to issue 11 licenses, you're going to have 19 individuals coming before me saying that coming before you, or whoever it is, the administration, saying, well, you've already signed off for me to go get a license, right? So that's what when I keep on saying it's a prerequisite, we've got to take the community host agreement and the license as one, in my mind, for this ordinance.
One way to do this might simply be for this committee to propose something. And before it gets to the full council or the finance committee, it'll be public and it can go to Attorney Flanagan and the people that are involved in that industry, and I can look at it. I've had some conversations with one of the people who worked at the Cannabis Control Commission. I could even, ask them to weigh in on it, so that when something eventually comes before the city council, then everybody will have as much information as they think they need. I know that we want to go, but that's why I tried to send in the Worcester Telegram and some of these things, but there's volumes and volumes of information on this, and I can't compile it all.
Well, I think
So I guess my question is just simply, can we amend?
We're voting.
Can we amend it to include not to exceed 20% of off-premise liquor licenses,
I think. at
or
this point,
11,
you
whichever is
can
greater?
I think that's a good motion.
Whatever you'd like, I think you can do that. And then whether it gets changed, people object to it or don't.
Can I
So
make a
amendment.
motion to amend?
I'll accept Councilor Klim's amendment, or if you want to make the new motion,
No,
it's
that's
up to you.
You just,
So I
motion
accept
to
his
amend.
amendment.
Okay,
We need a
so it's
second on
now
the amendment.
to limit the number of licenses to 20% of our alcohol, or 11, whichever is greater.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Everybody's good with that? That's the motion. Do I get a second?
I'll second Councilor Klim's motion. I will withdraw.
Any more discussion on it? Council LeBeau?
Does the Cannabis Control Commission still track them on a website like they did with the medical, so we could
Yes.
see where all 11 of those are at?
Yeah, I think that's where my intern so-called got the information they gave in the first place.
Okay.
Yeah, they do. And they print it out, I guess, I don't know, on a daily basis. Good job,
Because I understand what Councilor Kadim is saying. I understand if you enter into a host agreement, you know, you're signing a contract, but on the other end of it, there's so few of them that actually go through. I still feel like we're missing a piece. I'm probably going to vote no on this evening until we get the rest of the information from you, Judge, and then see what happens at a full council.
Maybe missing several,
And I think the discussion is going to go before full council, and whatever we do here, it's going to it's just going to keep the ball rolling. This is not saying that this is over tonight. We're going to have this discussion in full council, and I can guarantee you this will go on and on and on for a while. Right now, we have the motion in front of us. Is everybody good with what the motion says and what it does?
Yes.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We got a roll call?
Yeah, we'll do a roll call.
Councilor Kadim?
Yes.
Councilor Kilby?
Yes.
Councilor Liberty LaBeau?
No.
Councilor Viveras?
No.
Chairman Moore?
Yes. Okay. Next item on the agenda. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, proposed ordinance, personnel section 50-301, amended salary schedules for non-union positions. It's tabled 5/30/19. That is item number 5.
Make a motion to adopt, if there's no discussion.
You can make the motion, then we can discuss it.
Yep.
He wants a motion to adopt, is there a second? Second? There's a motion to adopt and a second. Discussion.
Thank you. I had asked the chairman to put this back on the agenda because I had asked for additional information from Mrs. Sahadi specific to the traffic portion of this. As far as the parking garages go, we had spoke about that at the last meeting. When it originally came down in front of us, it came down as, I believe it was $2,500 extra for each of these two department heads for attending meetings. My worry with that is that these are meetings that these department heads have been attending for, as Mrs. Gitkin said, decades, and to then change their salary because of that, or to put in a stipend because of that, I feel like we're kind of opening up a can of worms. For instance, there were several department heads that were at this meeting tonight. Is meeting attendance something that's in the job description? So if, say, either of these two people left these positions, a new person coming in, would they be expected to go to those meetings, and would it be within their salary?
Actually, Counselor, the intent was to compensate the department heads for taking the minutes at the meetings. You're correct. We have many departments attending many meetings, but they have the responsibility of going to the meetings, but also taking the minutes and producing the minutes, which then have to be subsequently approved by the members of the committee. So it was more the minutes and the issue.
I thought it just said to attend the meetings. That's what came before us. No.
Again, we reflected it to be the...
To attend meetings, add 2,500 to attend meetings, that's all it said.
Okay. It was for the minutes, so my apology if that got abbreviated on your form, but it was acknowledged that we do have a number of individuals that do attend meetings, that they are responsible to take minutes and...
So there are no
report
other
those
department
minutes
heads that
out.
also take minutes?
Right now, we have, I know the planning department, but they have a clerk that attends the meetings and is
Okay.
compensated to do the minutes.
Okay.
I believe conservation is the same. There's a clerk that attends. Certainly, you're familiar with all of
A
your
clerk
city
in that
council.
department?
Yes.
So I'm wondering, in either of these departments, if they have a clerk, how come it's not set up the same way?
Again, Counselor, it may be a function of past practice, but in these particular cases, the individuals, department actually attend the meetings and take the minutes and are responsible for, getting those approved by the board
So
subsequently.
for, say, planning, the clerk takes the minutes and the
Yes.
clerk is compensated?
And the clerk is compensated, yes, correctly, for
And is that,
attending those
is that
meetings.
as a stipend? No, it's not, Mrs.
No,
Sahadi.
it's overtime.
It's overtime,
Right.
okay. Thank you. Yeah, it didn't say that, it just said to attend the meetings, which I just wanted to make sure we weren't opening up a can of worms where we have all these department heads that have to go to zoning and even the council meeting, and then we don't do that, because that's how it was explained to us. I yield.
Anybody else? Council Kadim?
And one other thing, as far as the traffic, I know that Mrs. Sahadi had brought in a paper, because we had asked her what other communities do. In traffic, if we do not to exceed 7,355, where did this come from?
Yes, Counselor. So I was only able to get some hard documentation from the city of New Bedford because they also have 2 garages. And so I was able to compare their parking director to our parking director with similar responsibilities.
Okay.
So that individual in the city of New Bedford is referred to as a M13 in their ordinance. So an M13 in the city is at the low end of 71,220 to 89,032. Mrs. Ferreira is currently at 71,850. So she's at the low end of the comparison.
She's in
if
the
we're
very first step here.
comparing it to the city. So I know there was a discussion of whether the council would make their own motion to increase the salary to something else.
Well, the question I have is, we had talked about the last meeting, about them attending the meetings, but now you've corrected that to say to do all of the things associated with the minutes. But we had also talked about the taking on of the parking garages, which these numbers include.
That's correct.
Which is above the duties that were currently happening. So the only motion that I would make on that one is to change the not to exceed to perhaps 76,000, so that you wouldn't have to come back down again. That would,
That's on the parking clerk.
that would be on the parking clerk, because I had asked for the additional duties of the parking garages, and then the additional duties that they had sent down for the minutes. I yield.
Council Kadim?
Thank you. I was just going to ask about this salary table. So they've got 8 steps, or,
Yes, Counselor.
so theirs goes from 71,220 to 89, so almost 90,000.
Yes.
Okay.
And you can see basically the years of service is the second row,
Yeah.
approximately.
Okay. What's the years of service for our current parking clerk? Do we know? That'd be at least 20 years, right? If not more.
At least over 15, I
I don't know if that was always clerk, though, but she's
No,
been here
but,
forever.
So I guess I'd like to make a motion that, and again, that it's not saying that the individual was going to receive it, but to be competitive, and this is why I like to see comparative analysis to other communities, is to make that not to exceed 80,000. So you've got the flexibility, whatever was going to be suggested, and then you don't have to, obviously, through the years, make that, and that's still going to be 10,000 less than what the max step is going to be at the city of New Bedford. I think that, to me, is a reasonable.
So is that on both of these?
Well, no, so I want to make that motion on the parking clerk, not to exceed 8,000. And then I guess we can deal with that one first, and then I've got a question on the Parks and Recs.
Well, do we have to split these first, or can we do these?
We plan on voting on.
So can we vote them separate, or do we?
Yeah,
have
we did it with the clerks, so we can break them up.
So you have to make a motion to.
Separate? You want a motion to separate?
Motion to separate.
Motion was made to separate in second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion,
All those opposed?
motion to set the not to exceed to 80,000 for the parking clerk, director of traffic and parking.
Motion was made and seconded for the parking clerk, director of traffic and parking, to not to exceed $80,000. It has been made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Next one. Next discussion is,
Chairman, I still have the floor.
You still have the floor.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have something similar? Did you do something similar for Parks and Recs?
It's actually the same M13. So
Oh, it
I did.
is?
So right at the bottom of that page, you can see the M13, and I put Mrs. Smith's salary in. So she is generally in the center of their scale.
All right, so I'll make the same motion. Motion not to exceed 80,000.
Motion been made? Discussion? Counselor LeBeau?
On this, on the, were these numbers right to begin with? If the parking clerk was at 71,850 and you add the 2,500 to it, you're at 74,350, which is almost 1,000 over what you wanted as the not to exceed.
It would also include the current year 1%, 1.5% rather, sorry, 1.5%.
At the 74,350, but if this is not to exceed, we would have already been out of ordinance.
Right, so the way.
The same with the other one.
And that's also the case with a lot of the individuals. Councilor Kadim and I had this conversation. You changed just section 501. So instead of changing all of the sections with every not to exceed in every position, you changed just 501 to include the ASME contracts. And so if you were to rehire someone, let's just say, to go back, and that was the conversation we had, you would then go back to the original not to exceed. So you're not increasing the not to exceed each and every year, that
Okay.
there is an increase
So we don't
based
have to
on the-
worry, so the same thing here,
Right,
if it's,
right.
if the salary
I
is
believe it-
78,125 and we're going not to exceed 78,625.
Right,
that doesn't
otherwise you're
work.
gonna have a number of them that are all gonna be over the not to exceed by the ASME contract.
Okay, I yield, thank you.
Anyone else? We had a motion before us right now? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Motion to.
Could you exceed 80, right?
Not exceed 80,000.
So it's basically the same as the last motion, but this will be in regards to the Director of Recreational Facilities. Motion has been made and seconded to change that ordinance to not to exceed 80,000. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All set. Next issue. Proposed commercial waterway fees, passed through first reading and referred on 5/14/19. You okay? Mr. Smith,
Yes. good evening.
talk to us, tell us what's going on.
This is an effort to try to get the commercial water-dependent vessels to contribute to the upkeep of the waterways. As you know, all the recreational vehicle vessels contribute by way of an excise tax. The commercial vessels are exempt from that. So at this point, and there seems to be an increased volume of these commercial vessels. If you look just south of the Brightman Street Bridge, there's a lot of barges and commercial tugboats and vessels we've never had before. The state pier is accumulating a fair amount of fishing boats that are being parked there for no other reason other than it's so much less expensive than New Bedford. And none of these vessels are contributing to the upkeep of the waterways. So this is an effort to get these commercial vessels to contribute to the upkeep, which is significant, and it's growing. As the activity on the waterfront grows, the amount of calls and the amount of expenses that we're accumulating are growing significantly.
We did have a gentleman that came down at public input that said no other communities have these things. Can you just relate to us how many communities have these types of fees and what they are?
I think, well, first of all, you've got to look at the communities that have this type of waterfront and that would allow this at all. If you go south down the river, I don't know of any other community town that will allow commercial vessels to be stockpiled like that, and you just won't see them. I checked with the other harbor masters on the Cape, and none of them have them. They said if we did, our selectmen would never allow them to accumulate. It's unsightly. It's a burden on the community. These barges, They're old. We don't, it's even difficult to determine ownership of these barges because they're not regulated. And if one of these sinks and they're not insured, the responsibility is going to be on the city to salvage these.
How about Providence? How about New Bedford?
Providence, New Bedford, they all have different sets of regulations, and they label them different fees. New Bedford, for instance, has a $1,500 offloading fee, annual fee per vessel. They call it an offloading fee. And that is on every property along the New Bedford waterfront, because New Bedford has an ordinance where they claim ownership of the first 10 feet of the seawall on the entire New Bedford waterfront, whether it's privately owned or not. So to cross their 10 feet, they're charging each vessel $1,500 a year to tie up there. Providence has something they call, they've got a lot of fees in the Port of Providence, but all the fees that the private wharfages charge, Providence charges an additional 20% over that. They call it a security fee. So that the communities that do have to host these type of vessels are all getting something, regardless of how they label it.
Councilor Kadim.
Just a couple of questions, just in terms of, so section 2B, more than 14 days per calendar year. So how do we, I guess, regulate that? How do we identify if they've been here more than 14 days?
That comes from the state statute, and that's how they regulate the excise tax on vessels. They've got this threshold: any vessel that is moored, stored, or occupies space in a town more than 14 days cumulatively is apt to pay the excise tax for that community. And so that's how we came up with that 14 days.
How are we planning, the city of Fall River, of keeping track with that?
There's not that many of these commercial vessels. I think this ordinance would, at this point, probably affect maybe a dozen to 15. Very, very few. It wouldn't affect the recreational vessels at all. And most of them are in 2 or 3 areas that seem to be growing and growing as if parking lots for old vessels, so that they're easy to spot.
But I'm still not answering the question, though.
Okay.
How do we, is there a system in place? How do you track it? How do you know it's been 14 days, not 12 days, or 5 days, or, like, how do you know?
Yeah.
How are we going to know it's 14 days?
Well,
because we've got to get the bill out.
Right.
It's due June 30th, right? So I'm assuming we're going to do 14 days from the prior fiscal year. Is that what we're?
So a couple of comments, Counselor. You see in the ordinance as well that the facilities that are providing the space would be required to notify the people that are docking there of the requirement. There is a penalty for noncompliance. And additionally, the harbor master does routine daily patrols up and down the river, so it would be very easy to determine, as the pictures that you've seen before you. I mean, these vessels have been there consistently, day after day after day. So especially with regard to the docking, it's very obvious which ones have begun to call Fall River their home for an extended period of time. So there would be some responsibility to the docking facility just to alert those using it that there is this requirement. And then clearly the harbor master could enforce and keep track of the days.
But I guess if we're looking at a June 30th, that the excise is due, right? So if I just take motor vehicle excise tax, for instance, the motor vehicle excise is coming down right from the registry of motor vehicles. They keep the sales of these vehicles. If we're not getting that information, or even if we require, if somebody is not compliant, number one, how do we know that they're not compliant? Number two, how do we know that the information that they're providing is accurate? Number three, how do we prove that that boat or that vessel has been there for more than 14 days? I guess that, I mean, because if somebody wants to appeal it, what's the appeal process? How do we document it? I mean, if somebody wants to take us to court, I mean, are we going to show them 14 different pictures with 14 different dates on it? I guess that's my question.
Well, again, the intent, Counselor, in Section 2D was that the facilities providing the services would notify the customers, and they would have records that would indicate when the vessel arrived and how long the vessel was there. So there would be some cooperation with those that own the space to be able to provide to us. If the harbor master suspected that someone had been there for 14 or 20 days, they would simply go to the facility and say, we believe this vessel has been there for X days. And I would venture to guess that the owner of the land area would certainly be able to document yes or no based on their records.
Do they have a requirement to identify the number of vessels that are docked at their location? I mean, that we can verify?
They're required to notify them, but we could certainly amend if you felt you wanted to put that responsibility. It does provide that there is a penalty for not paying the waterway fee.
I guess my concern is that I don't want to get into a battle back and forth whether a vessel was docked for 14 days, not docked for 14 days, and then it's proof of documentation, and then it seems like this is more of, and I'm not suggesting that, we want to be on the trust system here, but I mean, businesses are here to make money, so I mean, if there's a way out from paying another fee, I'm sure they're not going to be forthcoming with, especially if that one vessel is on its 13th day, right? And June 30th rolls in, and June 29th, they were the 14th
Exactly,
day, right?
yeah.
Just trying to figure out what that checks and balances.
I might be able to address that. Other communities, almost all the other communities on the Cape, as far as the excise tax, require the marina or whatever the leasing facility is to submit a list of, slip rentals to the municipality so that they make sure that all those slip holders are on their excise tax list. We haven't done that in Fall River because there's only a couple marinas, and we walk those docks regularly. But perhaps on the commercial side, we could add that requirement that the leasing of commercial space would require that, and there's only 2 or 3. There would be the State Pier, and there's 1 or 2 others up the river.
So I don't, did you take, did the administration provide these?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So in terms of these two, the other pieces, I guess I see that, but the impacts, so outside of being unsightly, I guess, so what are the impacts? This look like there's
Well, I think, yeah, that was an oil spill of unfounded nature, and in my opinion, since we've had, a significant increase in commercial vessels, we've had a significant increase in oil spills. And these commercial vessels, they have bilges. The bilges naturally take on water, and they have motors and hydraulics, and they gather oil. And when enough rainwater gathers in those bilges, they're going to turn on and pump out. And New Bedford has this exact same problem, and they've instituted a free bilge pump-out policy. We don't have enough commercial vessels yet to institute that, but it became such a problem there that the city of New Bedford is providing bilge pump-outs to all the commercial vessels at no charge.
Okay. And I still go back. I mean, I'll yield to my other colleagues, but I just, the other biggest piece too is the issuance of these bills and how, I guess, the finance department's going to be issuing them, or if it's going through the harbor master, and then you get a collection of these, and then if we don't receive collection, what's the step? Is it?
It's, the current bills are issued by the police department, who issues all the bills for the fire alarms and police alarms or whatever, and they follow through on. The police department has a clerk there that, whatever their process is, of the collection of these bills.
They're using general billing through Munis right now.
Through Munis, okay. Because the only question I have, I mean, if somebody doesn't pay their excise, obviously they can't get an inspection sticker or their license renewed. In terms of this, are we simply going to court trying to get these individuals to pay their bill?
And this would actually be part of the harbor ordinance, and any violation of the harbor ordinance calls for a $50 per day penalty.
Okay, I yield for now.
I think I'd like to hear from 2 gentlemen. Before you speak, could you just state your name, your address?
Sure. Gary Oliveira, I manage McAllister Towing, Tug Company at 1 Shore Street,
Fall River.
Fall River. I generally don't speak, but I just got a bunch of notes. Be patient, please. I'll just get through this. We have a shrinking industry. It's not a expanding industry, and we're burdened with taxes, fees, regulations. New Bedford doesn't pay for the pump out. Mass DEP does. Mass DEP gets their money from people like me. Every barge that I push through Massachusetts, I pay $5,000. So, and the escort tug fee is another 12. So they're certainly getting their money from me. I pay taxes on 7 acres at one shore. I don't know, I am not your problem. There's been no oil spills. You're talking about the user fee to help offset the cost of operating services. What services might that be? Dredging? There is no dredging. Is that a federal channel? Because the state's not liable for it. The fire, emergency, police, security, border education, environmental protection, I don't follow you. And I just want to make this other comment, and I could be wrong, but are you aware of the dormant commerce clause?
Who are you asking?
Anybody. The sponsor of the bill. The
Federal law?
right. Here's a definition. The dormant commerce clause means differential treatment of state economic interests that benefits the former and burdens the later. Now, there's only how many commercial properties or maritime sites in Fall River? How many? 2 or 3. But there's hundreds of pleasure boats that I'm sure are taking up your security, border education, environmental protection, police, fire. It's not us 3 that are utilizing these services. So, thank you for letting me stand here and oppose this bill, but I think we're not your problem. And I would want to look at that dormant commerce clause, because it could apply here. The state can't override the federal, and this is in the Constitution. So it might be something before you pass it that you investigate a little bit. You're burdening us few people for, as you say, that the user fees utilizing, we're not utilizing those benefits that you're talking about. But the Commerce Clause is appropriate. I understand what you're doing, but to punish a certain few for whatever reason, I don't really know, but I understand to get revenue, but that's I think it should pertain to all voters, not just a handful. And that's all I got.
Thank you. Well, name and address, please.
Brendan Lund, 1338 Duval Street. To pick up where Gary left off, the way the statute, as I read, would basically apply to myself, him, Borden Light Marina with their 10 moored barges, the barge that's under the current functioning restaurant, the Tipsy Seagull. So they'd be on the hook for basically $16,000 to $17,000 a year, based on the current reading of the current proposal. I'd be on the hook for 6. If Gary chooses to bring his fleet that's in Providence to Fall River for service at the Shaw Street Yard, he'd be on the hook for another 6. Who else? Because that's really what we're getting at.
Well, no,
And, excuse me,
Finish.
Every issue that you've mentioned, the pollution spill, the emergency response, seems to have all pertained to the state pier. I agree with you 1,000% that we need to address those issues. I just think your solution might be misplaced. I think a cup of coffee with Diane Butler and the state pier and their operations might be better served to actually solve the problem. To Gary's point, we've never had an environmental incident in our operations. He hasn't. We've never called for emergency response. So there's that. As far as the stockpiling of barges, I think you're referring to Robert Auer, which is a tenant of Scott Church at Seaboats, where I also lease space. I don't know that just because they're unsightly, that's enough to penalize his business. There's a number of barges, if you drive over 195 in New Bedford Harbor, that are actively working to improve their harbor. Fall River itself calls me on an annual basis to provide a barge and a tug to provide fireworks, something that's widely attended and always seems to be a positive response. So I'm just a bit confused as to the application of this solution or proposed solution.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would address a couple of those points, and I know these gentlemen, they're hardworking gentlemen, I know their businesses, and they're fine. I think, that the statement that, well, nothing happens at my place, so we shouldn't have to pay, it's kind of like saying, well, my kids are out of school now, so I don't have to pay that part of my excise, my real estate tax bill. We're providing the services. The cost of those services are rising. If there's a medical emergency at any of these facilities, there is a response. There have been calls at McAllister Towing, because I responded to one of them myself. There's constantly abandoned boats in the waterways that the city of Fall River has to remove those abandoned boats. So I've got to go out and get that abandoned boat. DPW has to pick up that abandoned boat at the boat ramp and pay $225 per 100 pounds to dispose of that abandoned boat. This weekend, I got a call. There was a 50-foot piling floating down the channel. The city of Fall River had to respond to that and tow that. That took about 3 hours to tow that in. DPW has to pick that up and absorb the cost of disposing that. So to say, well, it doesn't affect me, it does affect you, because the city of Fall River is responsible for keeping that channel free of any navigational hazards. And that's a big part of our job, and that's a big part of the cost which the city of Fall River has the burden of, in addition to supplying any medical or fire-related emergencies to these businesses. And these are good businesses. I find fault with them all.
I want to just interject a little bit here. Is number one, this isn't an us against them.
Right.
Let's keep it to what we're trying to accomplish here. Are we doing it in the proper way? I'm not going to get an argument between this, okay? I think we all have one thing in common is the protection of our waterway. I think they want to keep it protected. We want to keep it, you want to keep it protected. What's the best way to do it? So let's stick to the issues of what we're trying to accomplish here and what's the best way to get it done. And I understand their concerns. They're legitimate concerns, and I understand your concerns.
Sure.
So the discussion starts from there. So
I think the concern is finding a way that those commercial vessels can contribute to the upkeep of the waterways as the recreational vessels do.
Just a quick question. When you're doing this, like the Councilor Cadimo says, what is the expected revenue first year you start doing this? What are we talking about?
I don't think it depends on the growth of these vessels, how many keep adding to the fleet, because we're allowing it. One of these operators told me recently he just bought 4 more barges. He's going to add that to the waterfront. So I believe there's maybe 10 or 12 of them in that area south of the Brightman Street Bridge. There's about 8 to 10 at the State Pier at their peak, and there's another 4 or 5 at Arc Bait, which is farther north up the river. I don't know what McAllister keeps. I don't know whether the last gentleman that was here at the last hearing said he only keeps one vessel there, so it's $1,000 on his part. So I don't know exactly what it'll be. It'll depend on the volume of vessels, but they seem to be accumulating more and more because the city is not regulating in any way.
I'm just trying to look at this from a cost benefit.
Yeah.
Where does this come from? Is there this outrageous cost that we're spending right now that needs to be addressed that's just not there? If it is, what is it? How much is it? And how do we respond to it? That's the question I have. Are
Yeah.
we just putting this in just as a revenue producer to get more money to do what? And I understand if it's
Yeah.
to protect the waters, I get it. But I just don't understand where we just came up with this out of the blue. It just all of a sudden, we're starting to talk about fees to commercial vessels, which I don't disagree with.
Right.
But my question is where's the cost that are there? Costs that are, how much is it? I mean, we can say it's there,
Right.
but I've never seen it in part of the budget. I mean,
Well, as we just discussed, some of it is just payroll. So if DPW has to spend Saturdays and Sundays, moving barges around or taking debris out of the water, then that's the cost that's
our
involved.
DPW moves barges?
When they get it to the land, yeah.
Whatever we haul up, DPW, boats.
Who hauls it out?
We would tow it to the ramp, and
And then-
DPW is responsible for hiring a flatbed or tow truck to get it out of the
So
water.
you've got the flatbed costs, you've got the overtime costs.
Do we have any idea what that is? 'Cause
I don't have an analysis on how many times or.
Council Kadim, I guess.
May I-
You want?
I'll yield to Council Kadim. Always? Okay. Yeah, just to further qualify, and clear up the record, I think the statement, and as I'm reading the ordinance, the fee is only to non-stationary barges. So
Doesn't it say right there, stationary?
that's a definition only. It clearly says down here, non-stationary barges. So when you mentioned Borden Light Marina, he would not be paying, as I understand it, for the barges that are his breakwater.
Those would be stationary.
Those are stationary barges, and
But it
what's
actually-
being assessed is non-stationary barges.
I appreciate you correcting me.
So let's be clear on that. The second thing that I do want to mention is the issue of the waterways. The recreational boaters are paying. They pay their excise tax. We receive those funds. We do not receive any funding from the commercial vehicles. So I would just respectfully suggest that when we're out trying to maintain those waterways, it's for the benefit of all of the boaters, commercial and recreational. And the commercial certainly they are businesses, they have a capability to pay those fees and to recover those fees. One of the objectives at the last city council meeting is the individual who leases out to people to use his property. So he's charging for that, and he's not actually directly paying it, but certainly his customers are, and again, it's a commercial venture. The other thing I want to mention is we talk about the cost. A lot of it is preventative cost. We know for a fact, I've attended the drills myself, that police and fire are out with regular drills, what to do in the event that there's a spill, a major spill. They have to be prepared to do containment of that spill. Because as we know, there have been other areas where these kinds of things have had serious adverse environmental effects. So we can certainly, try to quantify what the actual cost is, but there's also the preventative expense that comes along with being prepared in the event that there is a major problem. Additionally, if I've had opportunity to see these vessels, and the condition of the vessels that are now parked along our waterfront, it's absolutely despicable. The rust is absolutely coming off the hulls of those vessels and going into our waterway. And anybody that thinks that isn't adding a contamination, again, there needs to be a recognition for the fact that they are having a negative impact on our waterways. Yes, there's the safety issues. Yes, there's the response issues. And if you look at these pictures, New Bedford, New Bedford, New Bedford, it's too expensive over there, so they're all coming over here. And we're not charging them anything. And yet, they're utilizing our facilities and taking advantage of the same security measures and safety measures and response mechanisms that we're doing over here. I would venture to guess, Mr. Chairman, I don't know that we're talking anything more than maybe $15,000 to $20,000. But when you consider the expense to the maintenance of the waterway, we need to raise additional revenues to provide those services. The harbor masters are all volunteer. There's one $2,500 stipend paid to Mr. Smith. And I can tell you the time that he puts in is well beyond that. And it's all because there's no funding mechanism here. Last year, we did come before you in consideration for recreational. The council didn't feel that was appropriate, and because recreational boaters are paying excise tax, we acknowledge the fact that they were paying their fair share. But when it comes to the commercial vehicles, it's just not happening. So we're just trying to level the playing field. Recreational's paying, commercial should be paying. And that's all we're suggesting. And I would respectfully suggest, if you look at some of the other rates from the other communities, the rates that are being proposed are not exorbitant. For somebody who is here for a year, it could be $1,000. It's more, I think, for a longer vessel. You have the fee schedule before you. Under 30 feet, $500 annually. 30 feet and up, $1,000 annually. And then, of course, there's the cargo vessels if there's a lot of unloading. But again, the fees are not exorbitant, but it is a source of revenue. As the waterfront continues to grow, we need to provide more services. And we just don't think it's fair at this point that recreational boaters should be paying and commercial vehicles vessels should not be paying anything in support of the waterway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I can appreciate that, I guess, and I was going to go along the similar lines of Council Long with the cost-benefit analysis and trying to figure out what the cost was for the services, because we don't want to have an impact fee and then have it get challenged, right? So there are 3 requirements that you have to meet for a fee. So the first is that it's got to be applied to everybody. You have to have an opt-out ability to do that. And then you've got to be able to only generate revenue for the cost associated with the services that are being provided. So that's where I was going to go with. But just in hearing what you're saying, I think we're all in agreement. We want to protect our waterfront and the resource that's there. In terms of the excise that's being put on for the recreational, we only get excise for those that are actually listed in Fall River, right? So we still have individuals who come from Swansea, New Bedford, Providence that come in and that get docked at. I mean, I see them at the Cove. I see their unless they change the names on the back of their boats, it's always somewhere else. So I just.
No, that's not accurate. If they have a slip in Fall River, if that boat is moored or stored in Fall River.
Right, but we've got temporary, right? So you can do a temporary, so you have people on any given Saturday or Sunday.
Oh, yeah, transient boaters, yeah, exactly.
Yes. So,
Yeah.
which would be, I think that's the reason behind the commercial, right? So it's a transient situation going on. I don't know that the fees that we're looking to do, I think it creates more headache and more work internally for us. And I think if we need to bump up the budget, I would absolutely support bumping up the harbor master's line item in the budget and giving them the resources that they need. I don't know that the 500 or 1,000 or 500, addresses, rust on a boat and everything that goes along with trying to make sure that we don't have the pollutants that are in there, right? So that's my only concern associated with this. I'm all for if we can find out. I mean, in terms of inspections, and I apologize, I'm a little ignorant to what our authority is in terms of inspections of boats, and when you have boats that are rusted, I mean, is it similar to a vehicle where you got to go for an inspection?
The municipality has almost no regulatory authority over commercial vessels.
Okay.
Other than they have to follow the state, Chapter 91 regular boating, laws. But other than that, we can't do safety inspections aboard them.
Now, the commercials, I mean, the commercial vessels, they are, I think, Gary, I'm sorry, I don't know you, Mr. Oliveira mentioned that there is some money that's going to the state that you have to pay for the tugs and stuff like that.
Yes, the state of Massachusetts, Mass DEP, gets 5 cents a barrel of oil that goes through Buzzard Bay. And there's an escort that fee associated with that.
Okay.
I do understand, and I'm with you. Part of, we have to keep the waterways clear and dredged and safe. I'm not opposing that, and I'm not opposing your fee. I just feel that personally, paying taxes on my one Shaw Street is big. And the cost associated with doing business, a shrinking business is, I've got to push back. I can't just say to you, yeah, this is a good deal. I've got to oppose this. But I do think that this isn't going to help your problem. You need more revenue than that. I mean, let's be honest, this is about revenue to fulfill your obligation, right? This isn't gonna fix that. So that's why I'm suggesting, you know, get your revenue from State Pier, from Bourne Remington, where the ships come in. Use the tariffs that they use in New Bedford and Providence. Be realistic. You know, maybe that's the problem. You know, the boat's tied at State Pier. It's not my one boat that comes and goes, and if I bring in another one, that's really not gonna fix the problem.
I think this ordinance does apply to all those boats that would go into Boardman and Remington and the State Pier. There is a tie-up fee also, so this encompasses all those commercial vessels.
Is it big enough?
That's always a question.
What do you mean, is it big enough?
Is the fee large enough, is that what you're saying?
I'm saying for the ships, listen, when I come and go, I don't make any money. Hopefully the boats are away making money. But when a ship comes in with its cargo, they pay a security fee, they pay a docking fee, laborers to tie up. I mean, that's where the ports make their money. It's not the little guy it's not me. When I move oil through Buzzards Bay, that's, you know, doing something, I'm generating money. And when a ship comes in, the State Pier, Board Remington, where else are they coming in anymore? Nowhere. Exactly. You know, that's where your revenue is. And,
I think I would agree with you, and this ordinance does pertain to those, all those vessels that come into Boardman and Remington and the State Pier, the short-term tie-ups, the vessels that are picking up cars, going to, you know, foreign flag countries. This ordinance does apply to all those with the tie-up fee.
Oh, it does? But where is it here? Cargo vessel any size per docking. $500?
Too little?
Are you kidding me? It should be $3,000. Well, that's what I'm telling you, that's what.
This goes down to the old thing, you know, don't tax you, don't tax me, tax that guy behind the tree.
No. Listen, I can sit here and say, it's $1,000 a year. Why are we having this conversation? That's not it. That's not fixing the problem. It's a needle in my side, but it's not fixing your problem. Your problem is a cargo vessel coming in for $500.
I mean, the point isn't to dissuade business. We're very, very business-friendly, so we don't want to chase that business away. We thought it was fair. I mean, to me, to dock in Fall River for $3,000 seems exorbitant, but I'm not in that industry, so I can't. You know, maybe I'm not qualified, yeah.
I'm trying to help you. You know, my $1,000 isn't going to help you. But to put it in perspective, if that ship comes in once a year, you're going to get $500 for a ship that I mean, I don't really want to take up.
Motion, please.
I
will make a motion to support the administration on this one, and motion to refer to full council with a favorable recommendation.
This has already been passed through first reading. This would be to pass through second reading and send to the council.
I mean, I'll just say real quick. A single McAllister tugboat uses the Fall River waterways between 15 and 20 days per year, and thus incurs a $1,000 annual fee. A cargo vessel uses the waterways approximately 100 days per year. I don't know. The tugboat, carries only a handful of crew, requires little depth dredging, and discharges little, and it's none. We cannot discharge nothing. Don't spit over the side. And we are highly, highly regulated. The cargo vessel, hypothetical example, uses the waterways 5 times more than a tugboat, creates a constant discharge of gray water, because they do, and presents a higher risk because they are. Yet the cargo vessel and tugboat each would pay the same fee.
I think The cargo vessel is only here one, I've never seen the same cargo vessel here twice, to be honest with you. They call a brokerage company and they show up, whether they from Belize or Haiti or Libya. They show up, they're here for 3 days, they pick up their cars at the port and they leave. I don't ever recall seeing the same one twice. I mean, they could have, but I don't recall. So I think maybe, the $500 fee to start for that tie-up fee is significant, but maybe it's something we could look at in the future. I have no idea. I know what Providence charges, and you're right. It's, $8,000 to $10,000 by the time they're done with their security fees and everything else. But I just don't think we have that kind of volume in Fall River, and I wouldn't want to chase any of that business away.
All right, as far as the discussion, again, this is going to go to full council, so there's more time to discuss this. At this point, we're facing a motion here. Was the motion seconded? Do you have a second on the motion? Is there a second on Councilor Kilby's motion? No second? Councilor LeBeau?
You had just said you weren't, I forget the wording that you used, when he was explaining $500, it should be more like $3,000, and you said that's not your...
Well, I'm not an expert in that industry, the cargo ship,
So I
industry,
just wanna
other than the the printouts that I had.
So I'm going to either vote no on this or vote to table it, only because we have gentlemen that are here that possibly do have more information on it, and I think it does need to be fair. So if what they're saying is their $1,000 for their annual fee isn't going to address the problem, but maybe a big cargo ship coming in, $500, they're probably not even going to notice that. They might not even notice $3,000, but I think that we should get it right and make it fair for everybody. And if that's a conversation and some documentation from other places, like, what does New Bedford charge for their tie-up fee for a cargo ship?
15 for the cargo ship. I don't know. It is in that package that I
know, but
printed
the
out to you.
packet is
But
like
I know.
7,000 pages.
Exactly, and I don't know what their cargo ship fee is offhand.
No, and I think everybody's on the same page.
The annual fee is $1,500 per vessel. $1,500 they charge.
That's the annual, the one-time.
For a commercial, no, not for a one-time. For the annual tie-up fee for a commercial vessel is $1,500.
And this doesn't include stationary barges, you said, correct?
Our ordinance does not include stationary barges because they're not moving. They're not using the waterways.
Okay. But what about their, you had mentioned boats that are rusting and things like that. What about when those barges do start to fall apart?
They do need to be maintained. You're correct. Absolutely right.
So I'm, because they're not moving? Is it because they don't move?
It's because I believe it's considered a structure, not a vessel.
Okay.
At that point.
Interesting. Okay. I'm just, I'm hearing them give more information on maybe something that they have more knowledge on, and we should incorporate that before we pass it. Because I mean, if there is revenue from boats that are coming in from all those exotic places that you said, I would rather see that than, and I'm not saying that our local people shouldn't, everybody should have to pay something. If our recreational boaters are, then I think our commercial ones too, but I also think it needs to be fair. And maybe just look at adjusting those. And if it's a conversation that could be had, I would be all for that.
I just wanted to add, I think.
Mr. Butler.
That's on.
There you go.
I just wanted to add, I think we're all obviously passionate about this issue. And I just want to clarify, we all benefit, the commercial guys, the recreational guys, from all of Bob's tireless efforts on the waterfront. There is no question about that. And I agree with what you just said. I think we should all pay our fair share. I just don't see the current iteration of this ordinance as being, quote, fair share. A bang for the buck, so to speak. The ships that come into the state pier, it's basically 2 ships. They each come in once a month. So that's 12 trips per ship, or $6,000 per ship annually. $6,000 per the other one, so there's $24,000. And that's all I want to say.
You made a very good point. If you're gonna do this, do it right.
Well, the only thing I can think is if the council we're willing to make an amendment at this point to increase the fee to the commercial cargo ships. I think we know enough. We've got enough information now, based on, if the $500 tie-up fee is too much, does it need to go to 2,000?
So I don't know the answer to that. I'm hoping that,
I think more conversation with Robert Hour down at Seaboats, myself, Diane Butler, the general manager of the state pier, the agents operating out of the state pier. That might be a good place to start to do that fact-finding.
and a question to Mary. Is there a way to get the costs or the expenses? Is it broken out at all?
It is not.
It's not.
unfortunately. So it would just be a charge to overtime or.
And how do you track it on your end?
We don't. To be honest with you, we don't. We don't. Once we bring whatever this debris is in, it's the city's responsibility to dispose of it and, haul it out and track it, get rid of it. I can say I've spoken with the management at the state pier, and they're vehemently opposed to any fee at all being charged.
I'm sure that even you said you have to oppose it, but everybody wants to do what's right and is passionate about the water.
Exactly. And I get it. Nobody wants to pay something that they've been getting for free for a long time. So I don't know what the resolution is.
Well, I think,
I think it's a start. We're working on it.
Yeah.
We're going to be moving forward with it, to have the discussions to figure out what's the right thing to do. If other communities are doing it, then, and we're not, there's an issue.
Yeah.
And we should have something in place. And this is the beginning of it. So where this all ends up, again, I don't know. So we're just here. So what is the
I'd make a motion to table and then ask
motion
the
to
harbor
table in front of the
master
committee? Motion to table has been made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Councilor Kilby has opposed. Is there anything else, business, old business, new business before the committee? Seeing none. Motion to adjourn has been made, seconded. Motion adjourned.